one NIMBY told me that they wanted unhoused people to go out into the desert. We'll throw a hose of water out there and let them survive. There are over 50,000 unhoused children in the Los Angeles school district. 50,000. That's a low number. It's a lot more. There are many unhoused people that are employed. And for example, when you go to your stores, like Starbucks, I interviewed someone from Starbucks that was unhoused working at Starbucks. Imagine if we had a workshop where housed people were to live in the same fashion that unhoused people, and I gave you a long brown paper towel, and I told you have to use that, dry from that paper towel for a week. You could not use any bathroom towels. You could not use any anything to dry yourself off of that paper towel. How is that dignified?
Theo, welcome to the show. You are an unhoused activist and creator of We the Unhoused, a podcast that sheds light on the daily hardships of the unhoused community in Los Angeles. You've been published and recognized in the BBC and the L.A Times, and you'll be speaking at UCLA. We've actually been talking for quite some time. You know, you've been part of the LLAG community for years, but we finally found the time to go ahead and chat. I'm super excited for myself and for everybody else to hear your story. So for the folks who don't know you, can you tell us about yourself and how you became an unhoused activist?
Well, like I say, we were having an earlier conversation, so I'll start off from the point of authenticity. I was unhoused for over 8 years. I had extensive experience of living in various shapes or forms of being displaced. And the longest stint was over 8 years, and it was the result of me having a medical emergency. My background, I have an undergraduate in education, and I was an educator, and I was teaching, but I had such a severe medical emergency that required rehabilitation, basically speech therapy and things of that nature to try to come back from the stroke I had. So as a result of that, I'm not married. I didn't have a wife or children, and I didn't have a stronger family nucleus that would be able to nurse me to convalescence. So therein, I had to rely on some of my friends at the time that did couch commitments, allowed me to stay with them until things, I don't say wear out my welcome, but the point of it is they could not sustain me being, they have their own lives, their own families, and some of the work and some of the things that I needed to have done required me to need to be in a place where I basically in a convalescent situation. And also the reality of it is that I also had a sense of shame or trying to stay over. So I would kind of terminate staying as well. In the midst of that, we were also in the grips of the Great Recession in 2008. And therein we had to find jobs because people were losing their jobs and things were getting very difficult and unsustainable. And I could not, of course, sustain my place being injured and ill. And even though I tried to make haphazard kind of attempts to find employment, I ran into a wall because to understand when you are still trying to recuperate and then still trying to find a job to make sure you don't get thrown out on the street, it becomes difficult. Imagine, if you will, going to an interview and you're slurring your words, people thinking you are alcoholic or you are on substances. And I did the best I could to try to hide those things or hide some of the things. There are times you could hear me sometimes talk, and it will take a time for my words to formulate, or I mispronounce words, and that's just the vestiges of the stroke. So as a result of that, I kept on trying to find a way to get out of the situation. So I went to using the remaining savings that I had to go into medium, not 5-star hotels, medium-star hotels. Then I got to the 1-star hotels. Then I got to couch commitments. Then I went to the shelters, and then I ended up finally on the streets because of the carceral atmosphere of shelters and the impermanence of shelters, because people think that you're in shelter, you're getting services, but the shelters are geared toward to being there for a short period of time and that you find a job. And you find a job, you save your money, and you get out and find a house. But we are in a midst of a housing crisis, the exploding exploding rents, the diminishing returns from your employment issues play a part in it, and also the reality that I could not really go back into the field of the field I was in, because education is a very demanding field. Already, as well, there was new challenges as well, and then to bear in mind, I had to really lean into the reality that I'm different, and I have disabilities that this is not going to be easily to overcome without a support system, and I did not have that. So I went into a depression, and then I became unhoused, and my story could take you to a different level, but again, I became unhoused in that fashion until very recently, when I did the podcast that would help me to get some donations and sustain some funds to help me support me in a SRO, a single room occupancy, which is where I'm at now. So
One of the things I truly appreciate about the work that you're doing on your podcast is you're interviewing all of these unhoused folks, especially during this pandemic, that we're still in.
yeah,
But because a lot of folks forget that Americans, so many of them became housed during that pandemic, and now we're 3 years removed from when it all began, and your podcast really is like a documentation of a lot of these different stories and your own stories. Um, what are your thoughts on the pandemic from the unhoused community's perspective? Like, what do other folks miss?
you know, it was a very unique thing. At the time I had started my podcast, literally, I was unhoused, living on the street. I would do the episodes. I started out talking with my friends first. And like I say, the unhoused people are the most kindest people. When doing like we're doing a live recording thing. So there was always, like I say, I'm no stranger to mishaps and things of that nature. So I know, like, sometimes the volume go out and I'm out on the street and you overclouded with the rain or the sirens, all of those things. So I had to do a lot of retakes. And so when I was doing this and living on where I also had broken my ankle, living out on the street, the thing that I noticed, and I'd say this all the time, the first day when Mayor Garcetti had said the shelter in place, it was April 15th, I believe it was 2019. I remember the day very clearly that people were shutting down around. And it was literally, if you ever seen the movie, and I'm dating myself, of The Day the Earth Stood Still. I'm not talking about the Keanu Reeves version, but if you want that reference, that's fine. But the original, where there was no one around, no services around for people that were vulnerable, unhoused. There was it was basically a silence. It was such a eerie silence. No bathrooms were available for unhoused people. I was on a walker at the time, hobbling, trying to find a bathroom. It took me over 2 hours to find a bathroom, and it was an extensive line. Starbucks in Chinatown would not allow me to use the restroom because they were obviously, this had a disdain for unhoused people. They were treated me so badly. They told me not to clean up or wash in it. And this is the infancy of understanding what COVID-19 was. I remember I was doing mutual aid at a point in the pandemic with another excellent a person. Her name is Melissa Asadero. She does polo pantries, and we were going out to different places. And one of the residents had COVID, and before they had all of these places for COVID to get treated, they did not. This unhoused person had to go on a ship. They had to put her out and ship out into the water. But the problem is they were not feeding the unhoused communities because they just put them in a hotel to ship them to put them on, I think, the Queen Mary, and let's put them out to sea. That was their solution for the unhoused in the beginning. And I noticed that people were starving even if they had the GR or EBT, and what GR is general relief. And each month that you get tabulated, maybe like $194 for food and $221 for cash aid to sustain you for the month. And obviously, if you do any type of math, that's not enough for anything. And so you're really being frugal on your GR. But the problem was that there, when you did have the GR, the people forgot when you went to the store looking for bargains or trying to get things, people were stockpiling the resources that unhoused people would usually get with very minimal fuss or muss, and they would be able to get that. And people were getting in fights. I'm talking about housed people, not unhoused people, uh, getting into fights, hoarding meat, hoarding food, hoarding the smaller necessities because they, of course, this was the infancy of COVID. They didn't know how far this was going to go. And so when I started to do the mutual aid of doing the episodes and then going to different places to feed unhoused people, because I've always did something of the community resources, which is the genesis of mutual aid, which we will talk about further down the road. But the point of it is like when I would go to them, people were so hungry that literally they were snatching the food when I gave them, and they were literally eating the food, sometimes with the paper, sometimes, because the services or the churches or the places where they would go had complete everything shut down, everything. And the only thing is that they knew is that they were going to be in isolation or quarantine, which was a new word for people, at us only maybe they said a month or so, and they didn't really tell you the full extent of it because they didn't understand COVID at that time. But the fact of it is, you could see the desperation and hunger that many of the in-house did, and that infuriated me. And it also helped me join a couple other groups and called the Seize the Hotel movement to really push for the governor and the city to allow unhoused people to go into hotels that are unoccupied. There was nobody checking in hotels at the time, so they could also have a place to sleep. They could have a place to clean, and then two, we could work on the second phase of it, of getting dignified housing, and the second phase as well, food, where people are not forgotten, because it was very unhoused people were scattered, as you know, and they're very scattered in Los Angeles. Many people only think about, and unfortunately, that unhoused people live in Skid Row, and that is simply not true. And one of the reasons why I really pushed for not doing many interviews in Skid Row is to educate and illuminate the rest of the society that unhoused people are any and everywhere in different communities, and they're there because they have either community support, they know where the resources to tap into. And Skid Row, to be frank, it's very territorial, but it's also resource dearth because of the fact that there's such a huge concentration of unhoused people there. So you have to find a way to where you don't fall in the cracks of being in the houselessness industry as well. I hope I
And
answered the question.
no, I think that I I appreciate you explaining that, because one of the things that you had mentioned that I wanted to zoom in on are shelters, because in one of your podcast episodes, you were having a conversation with somebody and you stated that, you don't want to bounce from shelter to shelter. You want to be housed. And I think that's such an important point, because a lot of housed people believe that shelters are the answer. And if more people become unhoused, then we just need to build more shelters. And if unhoused people don't accept those shelters, well, then it's their fault for refusing services. For our audience members who are too stubborn to understand this problem, can you explain to us and help us like separate the fact versus the fiction of shelters, and tell us, you know, why yourself and other unhoused people have an issue with them?
When I first started this podcast, one of the reasons, one of the motivating factors is I had friends of mine that would say those very same things about shelters, or they don't want to help, or they like, even now when I keep educating my friend, they are mainstream media outlets that run and break their neck to find unhoused people that says they like being out on the street, and that carries a lot of weight for the housed community. It makes it very difficult for the majority of unhoused people to explain to you that nobody wants to go into a temporary solution because they are experienced in being unhoused. Housed people are not experienced in being unhoused and living to day and having uncertainty cloud their vista of support and needs, the things that they're going to need. When you, for example, over 6 years ago, I got stabbed and I was placed into a place in Salvation Army out in Bell, California. And I was trying to convalesce. But the thing of it is that I did not want to stay in the shelter because of the carceral attitude. The carceral attitude, because house people believe, and if you go onto Nextdoor or other vigilante sites, they have this notion of unhoused people are violent criminals that are going to attack children, elderly people. They're gripped with substances. They're in the throes of their mental health crises. And they are basically afraid of unhoused people because I think it's a mirror to them to realize that the vulnerability and the illusion of capitalism is just what it is, an illusion. Because if capitalism was such a successful gambit, then people would not be fighting for livable wages. There would not be notes that's got over into other restaurants saying that people don't want to work. And that underscoring the issue that people want to work for a livable wage. They don't want to work from sun up to sundown and then have nothing of a meaningful life. And there is with the unhoused community, there are many unhoused people that are employed. And for example, when you go to your stores, like Starbucks, I interviewed someone from Starbucks that was unhoused working at Starbucks. Like the restaurants, there was a restaurant I go to in Chinatown. The gentleman works in the back washing dishes, and in the end of the night, he sleeps in his car. So, and to be very frank, because we all have to eat, I've interviewed people out in Oxnard, California that are literally like in the rain right now, literally living out on where they're picking the produce, and they're literally living out on in the fields because there are no affordable housing and there's no sustainable services to help people. But that's vegetables, those salads, those other things that we get that we need for our own nourishment are coming from unhoused people that are servicing our community. That conversation has never really been explored by house people to explain to something has to happen. You just don't magically get your fruit and vegetables because someone waves a wand and pixie dust just float and you get that. It's coming from somewhere. Your coffee is made by housed insecure or financial insecure communities that people have all around the world in the name of global capitalism has used to benefit and enrich certain people of our community. And so it is that when we talk about the conversation about shelters, the shelters again are designed and was designed with the meritocracy narrative that if you pick yourself up by your bootstrap, therein you could be able to get yourself into a sustainable house. And if you don't, then it's all your fault. And we offered the solution. There are resources available. Listen, if you go any further, look at Nextdoor. Nextdoor loves to say those kind of things. And it is simply not true. Right now, I'm doing a story to bring this even much more current. I have a couple of people. There is like Mayor Bass in Los Angeles is not the in-house friend. So we need to be clear on that. She is basically upholding the capitalistic structure, the meritocracy, the respectability politics, and the infrastructure for white supremacy. So now that we've got that understood, here is how she's doing it. She's doing it by this belief that we must make sure that everyone gets in safe. Inside safe or safe inside is her mantra. But the issue is that inside safe, the resident, like there's a couple of residents that have communicated with me, they're starving. The point was like people like Tracy Parks, who is also a NIMBY that has the support of NIMBYism, is using these mantras, using these statements to shame or to invalidate and dismiss the experiences of unhoused people who do not want to be shunted from place to place, and without any strong assurances, strong tangible target plan that they come from the hotel or shelter to a home. That's it. They don't want to go through all of it, going to places that like these shelters where you have to have only 2 bags. And then they have to go through a search. You have to be wanded. Or you go into the motel and where one of the residents that showed me their pictures, they have an open, the window is shattered. So she's sleeping in a frigid room, and her bed is filled with bed bugs, or the showers is not being cleaned. Then you have to contend with the either the abusive staff or the low paid staff. or the housing secure staff themselves that believe that they have made it because they have a reason that they're over other unhoused people, and unfortunately creates a dichotomy or a tension that because they also do or the hench persons of this hostile system. So when we talk about shelters, we it is an anachronistic idea that has been still pushed on by problematic people like Reverend Andy Bales from the Union Rescue Mission, who during the height of the pandemic, there was 100% of people in those places that had COVID-19. There has been residents that I have spoken with that had families that were being written up or being threatened to be thrown out because their children were too loud, dealing with the trauma of being unhoused. There was the conversation where, well, actually, she showed me the picture where she and her children were literally sleeping and by a shower train because they had such an overflow. So shelters and nonprofits are on the forefront of making this conversation like that they have the answer. Andy Bales also, at the time of the era of Trumpism, was trying to circumvent not only getting people back into shelters, but making sure that unhoused people were shunted in the far-flungs near the airport district. The last person that also is the grifter, which I would love to talk about the grifters or the white saviors, but that's was the Hope in the Valley, who is running around, which he infuriates me and he disgusts me. I have different angers about religion. I left the religious cult many years ago because I come from a very deeply religious family, so I have some trauma from that. But it infuriates me how he has hijacked the unhoused community by saying he's been out here on the street and he gets over $500,000 from his congregation or people to help the unhoused. But this is the same one that tells these community members that if they see unhoused people near the tiny sheds that he is co-sponsored or advocated to call the police or have them removed. So the long and short of it is shelters are not sustainable. The tiny sheds are not sustainable, which is another facet that the city always loved to have. This is their mantra when they're dealing with housing: a carrot, stick. And you have to ask yourself, why are they always talking about carrot and stick? In their mind, they think, for example, it's a conditional response. For example, if I give you like a certain amount of goods or services and you don't accept, and then I turn around and punch you and you like, wait, what the hell? But because you didn't accept the services. That's the carrot and stick approach. Anything that activists or people that have told them about creating dignified solutions, they grab onto it. They'll hijack the vocabulary and therein use it to use the carrot and stick approach. Say, case in point, the Project Room Key that came out. Many of us here in the local area, myself included, pushed for dignified lodging for unhoused people. You know what they did? They joined on to it. They said that they were going to do it, and then they introduced shelters who have the carceral systems in place and enact and use that to demonize and cause so much more new trauma for unhoused people. That's the stick approach. And then when they were ceremoniously evicted, or they use these 3-strike rules and all of these writing up, making it very difficult for unhoused people to sustain themselves. They isolated them. They couldn't talk to their neighbors. They couldn't go out at certain times. Some places had them against them from having one resident, one activist stated that she was against an unhoused person making coffee in her room. There was another instance where I was really appalled by that, but it was even worse. We are right now inside, and I'm sure you got up in the morning, you got your coffee, you got your shower, you got your towel. Now, so imagine if we had a workshop where housed people were to live in the same fashion that unhoused people, and I gave you a long brown paper towel, and I told you you had to use that, dry from that paper towel for a week. You could not use any bathroom towels. You could not use any anything to dry yourself off but that paper towel. How is that dignified? And these are the stories why I really wanted to uplift the unhoused voices, conversely than the housed, because the housed always has this fairy tales spin, always are trying to use this troubling language or problematic language, to be sure, to say that, we're wanting solutions. But their solutions is always engineered with a carrot and stick approach. And if you don't subscribe to those ideologies, then you are like these leftist activists, or you just want to keep unhoused people on the street. And those are the problems that we are undertaking right now during this inclement weather here. I just got, like I said, I was reached out by an unhoused residents talking about the difficulties, the stressors of trying to explain it to people, because it's a lot of information to unload on people that are not dialed in to the crisis. They only see it tangentially or superficially on their way to work, school, or going about the comings and goings of their lives.
I'm happy that you really fleshed out the different chess pieces of that, because I mean, even with the example that you opened up about uh, news media loving these stories of an unhoused person who's like, I don't mind it. I'm just over here minding my own business. Because
Mhm.
I remember seeing those types of videos on YouTube, and they go viral, and you look at the comment section and everyone's like, look at this guy, he has the right attitude. And to your last point about these different solutions, in parallel with the rise of more unhoused people due to industries tanking and laying off a bunch of people, or whether it's a pandemic, there's always this parallel between increased unhoused people and people who feel like they have a solution for that. And so there's always this conversation about, well, here's a new program that we cooked up, here's money that we can throw at into this band-aid solution. But it never feels like they actually want to address the root issues. And I know that you were talking about all these different uh, 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 items that are in play that are making this a lot more complicated. Uh, when you're looking at these solutions that people talk about, that they say that is going to, eliminate unhoused issues, what stands out as some of the biggest performative acts of saviorism?
Right now, it's safe inside. This is a big performative thing. Mayor Bass, unfortunately, has subscribed to the policies of her predecessor, Eric Garcetti. Eric Garcetti basically allowed just the council members to create, and he signed off on a policy, which I'm going to take a moment. I have to explain it because how dire the situation is, and how the rise of fascism is embedded into the unhoused crisis, and we need to really talk about it. The unhoused crisis has been generated for some time, and we've gone through it in different permutations. But the long and short of the major brunt of the victims that are dealing with unhoused people are Black and Brown community members. And the fact of the matter is that this is a new form of Jim Crow. This is a new form of punishing the poor. The only difference is, which is more highlighted, is people of color are taking up the banner and doing the work of most of the white supremacist tools out of the toolbox. So what 4118 is, 4118 in Los Angeles is an ordinance. It states it is against the law for an unhoused person to sit, sleep, or lie when there is posted anywhere in the city within 500 feet. For example, this and to be clear, if you are unhoused and they know that you're unhoused, and just for sitting in an area that other housed people could sit, they could use the 4118 policy to ask you to move. And it has been going on in these areas where they see unhoused people. And so to understand that, the second thing that's going on in Los Angeles is the bicycle ban. I don't know if you have a bike. I don't have a bike. I can't ride a bike. But if you had a bike, you have popped your tire, or something, some other mishap has happened, and you get off your bike and you want to repair it. In Los Angeles, if you are unhoused, it is against the law for you to repair your bike. If there are 5 different pieces of it, it's an ordinance. I know it's so strange. House people don't understand the growing number of fascism, because they have had a story, particularly in the LA Times, that unhoused people are running up and stealing housed people's bikes. It got so horrible that there was an unhoused person that bought their bike, and they use, of course, we understand why it's much more imperative for unhoused people to use bikes because of the distances or trying to get to the fro, to other tasks, and into the creating of an economy for unhoused people, because there is a community, there is economy, because a financial surplus is hard to come by because we're living in capitalism and no one's hiring enough of unhoused people. So you're trying to do alternate income, which is also another thing that's problematic about hustle culture, that you're trying to hustle to eke out of survival. So if they see that you are an unhoused person and you have bikes, or you are repairing your neighbor's bike, or you are even repairing your own bike, and they know you're unhoused, it's against the law. And you can be, that's probable cause for them to steamroll into it. We all seen the videos of black or brown people being accosted and doing the daily comings and goings of life. And that is added to black unhoused people. And if they know, like the NIMBYs, which I was explaining, NIMBYs are not in my backyard. They don't want people that are unhoused in their communities, are traveling or minding their business or sitting down repairing their bike. Now you have double jeopardy, because now a police officer, and with the help of NIMBYs, can target you and be able to make your existence so unsustainable that you can't come back to the area, or you can't go and tap into whatever things that you, like any other citizen, can do. If you think this is that's horrible, imagine what's going on in Tennessee. They just voted to and approved that it is now a felony for unhoused people, for you to be unhoused. If they catch you in a public place, you are going to prison for at least 6 years. These conversations in the house community is not known. And now imagine you get caught, and life happens, you're out on the street, they see you, they call the police, they find out you're unhoused. That is a crime. You are now, it is now a felony that you will do hard time. Now, having no resources, you're not going to get bail, obviously. You're going no resources. You do hard time. You get out of doing hard time, and then you have to go back and recreate the cycle again. Because now that you have a felony record, what place is going to hire you? Now, what place is going to offer you lodging, or the lodging is going to be subpar, that you have to stay in that cycle of displacement, housing insecurity, and financial insecurity. Therein creating that same cycle again. So they catch you in another area, sleeping out in the public or sitting down or whatever, then they're sending you again to prison. In Miami, Florida, they have a conversation on trying to put all of the unhoused, or the bulk of unhoused people, out on an island near a sewage treatment plant. I spoke about that. And it is like on these, this is the rise of fascism. This is the rise of people coming together. It is not just like the when we say nationalists, white nationalists, who are like the Proud Boys. These are people in every walk of life that are housed, and every color and race and gender or sex or presentation, gender presentation, that are in agreement due to capitalism, meritocracy, and picking yourself by your bootstrap. And we as a society are on a very horrible, dangerous course, because we already understand the animus that's going on with the transgender community. They're trying to make it against the law for you to be yourself, your authentic self, or who you want to be. So imagine you're dealing with that and being unhoused and having to have a bike. Put all those three things together, and what is going to happen? And I don't like to say this because people get up in arms, but this is reminiscent of a time that we lived through history that we were appalled out, and we spoke about, and we fought against in some respect. And we're not doing it now because they're unhoused. They're the detritus of society, or and like one of them saying, we're the excrement. One NIMBY told me that they wanted unhoused people to go out into the desert. We'll throw a hose of water out there and let them survive. So this normalcy, this normalizing unhoused people as other or animals. I want to, before we get to the next question, I want to talk about one thing that really cooks my grits. a few months ago, there was this big kerfluffle about 4118. And I wanted to put it into perspective to you. There are, most people have children, or most people know of children. There are over 50,000 unhoused children in the Los Angeles school district. 50,000. That's a low number. It's a lot more. These are our unhoused children that are going to school systems. Now imagine, because our society loves to uplift cops, or make them like they are beatific. Imagine those police officers are coming in telling principals that these people are offer services and they don't help, and that's your parent. They're telling people in schools, police officers are telling children in schools, if you see unhoused people, call the police. Now I want you to think about, you're in school, you're hearing that because you're displaced and unhoused, that if they see you or your parents, to call the police. What is that message you're sending? Is that you are a criminal and you are not wanted in society. These are the conversation points that gets occluded by mainstream media. They refuse to talk about it. They curb and skip off on it. They don't really take the politicians to task, and politicians definitely are very glib and wordsmiths. They definitely know how to obfuscate the issue. But one of the major engines of this is police officers creating this index that unhoused people don't want services, and if they don't want services, then they are criminals. And which is the result of our budget being over 3.5 billion dollars, and there's such a uneven scale of the services offered to unhoused people in Los Angeles.
Geez. I mean, I it's interesting when you're talking about people who invest just so much energy into cooking up their. I mean, it's. I hate to like oversimplify it by saying it this way, but kind of like that desert example that you said, throw a hose out there. I mean, this is like pure evil shit.
Yeah.
And it's 100% fair to say this is totally fascist behavior. This type of over policing is another strain of Jim Crow. I mean, I
Yeah.
remember that story about, in San Francisco, a bunch of rich people trying to put boulders on the sidewalk
Hostile
to,
architecture.
yeah, hostile architecture, taking it upon themselves to add that into the city as opposed to the city building that in themselves. And I know people who, that is their personality. Their personalities, they care about social issues, but the issues that they care about are unhoused people and how to eradicate this, because they see this
Hmm.
as neighborhood blight. They see this
Hmm.
as an eyesore. They see this as a detriment to housing values. But they don't get that the person on the sidewalk isn't just some alien who's come to invade the neighborhood. Like, that was your neighbor, that
Hmm.
was somebody who was in here. And I want to zoom in for just a second and talk about one of the elements inside this conversation, which are the hoops that you have to jump through, because way too many people think that all you have to do, if you want to even just like walk into a shelter, is you walk in, you pick up your keys, and then you're like, I'm done.
And you skip on down the yellow brick road. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
that's
exactly. Like, all right, problem solved. But it's
exactly.
like they don't want to talk about the reality of means testing, of wait lists, of qualifications, of all of the tedious crap that you have to do just to receive basic services. So can you talk a little bit about these hoops?
Well, let me tell you this too. Like, for example, another quick example about how fascism is. There is a number that if you see an unhoused person, it's called 311. And 311 brings out the sanitation, the police, or mostly the police and sanitation to extricate the unhoused. Let's say, for example, if there's an unhoused, that they feel that they'll create a situation to say they're violent. 311 is your answer, or 911. What number is it for when unhoused people are being harassed, like the gentleman I told you that had his own bike robbed from a house person because he said that was his bike, and it wasn't, because he bought the bike. He showed him the receipt. He didn't care, and he took the man's bike. What number? Because 911 is not going to take that story and use it in a valid sense. So there is no story. There is no number for them. The number that unhoused people get is 211 to find resources to get off the street. If that is not an unjust, unjust type of way of treating the unhoused crisis, I don't know what is. So right now we're in inclement weather, and it's such a way that unhoused people are trying to get out of the rain, the cold. They're flooding in places. They're congregating in places like in train stations, which now is a big thing. That argument they are using on metros, that women are unsafe because unhoused people are there. And to be sure, unhoused people do not have enough services to do showers, but they most often than not, most unhoused people are on the trains to be warm, and they're sleeping. Yes, there are unhoused people that are in the middle of their crisis, but they're not accosting anyone. But they are trying to stay warm and try to ride out the storm. But patrons, house patrons who are trying to get to from work, who believe that they are not like those unhoused people, the denizens, or to use, or as an example, unfortunately, the case in New York with I believe her name was Miss Michelle Go, where she was pushed off the train by a person that was experiencing auditory illusions. They're using that as the impetus to get more police presence, get more carceral type of ways of discouraging. They're using poorly paid, poorly trained people, ambassadors of Metro, to step off and to try to discourage unhoused people from congregating. So to get to that story, so once you get to 211 and it's flooded because of the overloaded, that you can't get anybody, or when you get to a number, let's say, for example, you need to find an immediate shelter in your area, or you need to find somewhere where you can stay warm. You call it 211. The number is overloaded. You have only a certain amount of energy, you only so much power in your phone that you have to use it wisely, because you're charging the device. You got to go to another place, or you don't, or your charging device needs to be that you have to use it sparingly. You can't just like, well, your phone dies down, oh, I can charge this up, go to a home and charge my phone and be done with it. That's not what's going on with non-house people. They have to go to places where they have an outlet and they'll be able to use it to charge it. So they go and you contact the number, it's overloaded. Maybe 30 minutes later, still overloaded. Now you're still out here cold, you're hungry, you can't sit in place. Remember, this is 4118 land. So you can't stay in another place because, or you can't stay in a store without buying something, or you're going to have them looking at you side-eyed, or they're going to be calling the police and get you removed. So you got to now make a move, so you got to move somewhere else. You call 211 again. They give you a number to tell you to call this number. Now, there are over 69,000 unhoused people. Let's do the math. You call this number, there is they have voicemail. You leave a message, have them call. No one calls. You call again, no one answers. And when they do answer, it's like, way before the time of intake time, or and they tell you intake is over. They don't have any beds. Call back tomorrow. Now, that's the beginning of it. When you hear NIMBY say that unhoused people like to be out here, that's not what's going on. Even if they want to get inside, the uphill battle of it is like a Sisyphean experience. Soon as you get the rock up to the hill to try to get something, then there you go. There's another calamity, or there's another obstacle in the way. Now you are out of a place and options to stay. So where are you going to stay? You're cold, so you're going to stay on either public transportation. You got to find a way to stay out of the rain, because with my own experience, I can tell you, the hardest thing to do is to try to stay warm and try to stay dry. You go and spend, now you got to run to a laundromat that may be 24 hours. Now you got to wait for the bus, get off, dry your clothes, then to go back and run out into the rain again. So, and then two, of course, you're not going to smell like, April fresh, because it's the mildew. You're trying to hold on to your survival belongings, remaining of them that you belong, and then you try to call 211 again, And then you're trying to hear the words on the street from your community members saying, well, check this number out and call them to see maybe. So you're now in Los Angeles. If you started from the downtown area, you go all the way out to the valley in hopes that you find a place to stay. You hope to get on, be there early, like 3 or 4 in the morning, because most often unhoused people are up 3 or 4 in the morning waiting in line because they know the line is going to circle around the block, or then they have a certain cutoff with nonprofits doesn't take a certain unhoused people. So now you wasted that time, you wasted that day, and now you have to go and find another place. So you have limited time, diminishing power on your phone, and you can't, and you're under the gun with 4118. You're under the gun with NIMBYs who see you and looking at you with such disdain that you cannot. You have to be moving. You always have to be moving. So here's another issue happening. You're starting to become sleep deprived. Try living without sleep for 3 days. Your behavior becomes bizarre. No human being could survive that. So you're trying to stay warm. You go to the hospital, sit in the waiting room. You try to do all of that, but they run you out. Many in the house used to stay at the LAX until people complained and they were trying to clean up, and they ran them out. So every place that you try to find some kind of way to sustain or survive is encroached or it's being shut down. So what is there to do? You're going to have a crisis. You're going to go through trauma, and you may work into a way that people look at you again to criminalize you or lock you up. So it's very difficult to stay in those systems. Well, and Section 8 is the same thing. Section 8 has been on a waiting list for 10 years, even if you do apply. So it doesn't mean a damn thing. They open it up for lottery just to accept the application, but it don't mean that you're going to get on and get some housing. And then when that happens, then you have to go out into this hostile NIMBY world and try to find people that would accept Section 8. Now, mind you, most landlords do not accept Section 8. They have this dim view of unhoused people as criminals, and they do background checks. If you've been arrested for being unhoused, that's going to show up on your record. If you've been arrested for anything like trying to use the restroom, they'll use that against you because there are no public bathrooms in Los Angeles that allow unhoused people to be dignified to use their restroom unless you buy something. And there's no porta potties, not enough sufficient porta potties for unhoused people to use. Or any hell, let's be real. House people can't find bathrooms to use, even if they sometimes are customers. So these are the beginning stages of obstacles. Now you have to deal with the trauma of all of the day, trauma of the frustration of trying to keep a positive attitude, the trauma of trying to not sink into the depths of despair and depression, and then dealing with, now you have to deal with the stresses of not knowing what's the next step because you don't know what's going to happen the next day. I hope that just answers that, because I'm just remembering all of those kind of things that I went through. And then here's some insipid ignoramus running around saying that people don't want help, and there's help out there. It makes you want to punch somebody in the throat. But that's it's just a willful denseness there. There are some people that are really ignorant. There are some that are deliberately willfully ignorant because they're afraid that if something bad happens to them, like a medical emergency or a traumatic brain injury, that they may have to go out into the wolves of the society.
Yeah, and I think a lot of these people forget that a lot of these hurdles are almost also traps. Like even something as simple as going to the bathroom, and that can end up, you have these stores that are hostile about that, and they can call the police, and so there's just basic things. And so it's like when you're looking at this hostile world, and you have these people who feel like they understand, they feel like they want to be able to help out. If we're speaking to those people who feel like they want to help, but it's not totally there, what would you say are some common mistakes that people make when they try to help out or when they try to communicate with unhoused people, just like in a day-to-day basis?
Well, one of the things that I noticed with, and I'm going to talk about white saviorism because I think this is a very point. Like people in their movements in earlier and I'm an educator, so I'm going to do a quick history lesson. One of my heroes that I like and I really admire was Ida B. Wells Barnett. And Ida B. Wells Barnett seen a similar displacement with uh, Black men that were fleeing from the South during the era of lynching. And she was a very big lynching abolitionist against that. And she seen that they were coming into the city of Chicago and they did not have the resources or the welcome to get them to lean into the community and get resources to get them out of a poverty insecure environment. And Jane Addams is a white. People know who, you know, the Hull House, and there were people, immigrants that were coming on with similar stressors in being in poverty, and she would basically uh, fundraise and get a swell of money. Conversely, Ida B. Wells Barnett was not able to do that because one, we have the racial complexity. People like there is people like uh, Andy Bales, people like Ken Craft, people like Mark Horvath are the example or the personification of white saviorism. They don't see the intersections of race and colorism and sexism and the issues that are with the LGBTI plus community that are unhoused, which, like I say, and they don't understand how these intersect. They use a wide thing of like this Christian nationalism or this willful ignorance to make it seem like they are helping unhoused people, but they're exploiting them. And then when the unhoused people have the temerity to speak out on them, they're either demonized or they're cut off or they are separated and used to as an example. In the activism circles, even outside of the unhoused community, these are things where we have white activists that come in and do these deleterious kind of behaviors, and they get the financial windfall. Like, for example, with me with We Unhoused, I, I I literally, and I say this, which I'm always very proud of. I created a podcast living on the street, literally. I didn't have a financial base. I didn't have backing that people came and just flooded into me. I pushed for it. I pushed for creating a voice against housed sensibilities, really trying to say this is the unhoused people's time to say what they want to say. If you want to, become a part of it, you're going to have to listen to them. You're in their home. We can't coddle to your sensibilities. We can't sit here and allow you to dictate how you're going to accept their trauma and their pain. We can't let you deliberately, which once Mark had said about my podcast. Well, we have only a small percentage of people listening. I'm like, but the percentage of people that are listening are unhoused people. That's the audience I'm trying to get. You're trying to get people to stay on these problematic viewpoints about unhoused people and creating these systems and keep the system going while you're grifting off of them. Ken Craft is doing the same thing by going out and saying he's been unhoused, living in his car for a few days, and he's losing his memory and all of this kind of stuff. And he's pandering to these other white Christian nationalists that believe he's doing this God's work. Then he goes out and says he stays out for 3 days in the street. He's built like over $500,000. I have been unhoused for over 8 years, and I can tell you, you can look at my, I never made $500,000 living out on the street, talking about it or getting anybody to do it. It is like it has been. I have been very grateful for Patreon, but let's face it, Patreon is not sustainable. I've been fortunate into other places, being like the activist in residence, and able to stave off housing, being out in the street again. But to be clear, this is one of the many pitfalls that when we said in the revolution that we breathe life into the people that are being affected, like people of color, to be infected. We don't milk or build a movement because you're white and you have the complexion for protection, and then you're saying that you are advocating for the most vulnerable. You're only doing it for a quid pro quo thing. For example, one of the things that I had issues with was how we were being exploited with the video. I don't know if you've seen it. Good Trouble. Good Trouble was a show on HBO mimicking or mocking how the activism circle was doing. They claimed that they were doing good work. It was done by a white woman, Joanna, the last name escapes me. And during this controversy, Mark Horvath was not even involved into the sweeps that I witnessed. There was a sweep that was going on that I witnessed, and there was another one on another area. And we had called out Good Trouble to call account to the behavior that went on and explain that you're mimicking what we are really serious about. And to that end, he jumped into the conversation and he basically over used his white privilege to uh, ignore and dismiss my firsthand account as well as other people's firsthand account about the situation. And then when it was brought to his attention by people asking questions, he started becoming much more abusive. He blocked people. He made it such a way to alienate the true activists, the people of color, and some of them were white, were trying to call him in first, and he basically doubled down on it. These are the ones that I strongly suggest for our community members that really want to do something about it to avoid them at all costs. Most often than not, I would strongly, because we have a lot of mutual aids out here. I want to give a shout out to J-Town Action Solidarity. I work with Solidarity with the Asian community here, and I've been doing this over 2 years now with them. We have a mutual aid, which is every Saturday, like today, because it's raining. We have from 2 to 5. We offer food, phone charging services, harm reduction, clothing, and other services that they, poetry or bike for them to express what's going on, and sometimes an organizing kind of opportunities that may happen. So we offer that, and that's one of the things I would suggest, because right now we're doing a winter fundraiser, um, as well as support my Weedy and House Patreon. I mean, these are the things that are tangible, that because I definitely use the funding not only to survive, but also use the funding to go out to mobile power-ups, mobile mutual aid groups. I go to because I go everywhere now and do with unhoused people, and they are hungry. They need services and phones. I basically create that where they may be in inaccessible places that I can offer that service to it, because not everyone can get to a library. Not everyone has the opportunity or transportation to get to a coffee shop, or they may be accessibility challenge. That's another conversation we need. We have a higher growing elderly unhoused community going population that people don't know. We have so many facets of it that it's time doesn't permit me to go into full depth to it, but you get the idea.
I wanted to add in another little question, just sort of piggybacking on this, because I kind of want to attack the ideology and the mentality of a lot of um, people who are supposedly progressive. I mean, especially as a resident of California, we always hear these conversations about California being this failed state that doesn't really actually protect its people, and a lot of Democrats try to shy away from that. Oh, we're okay, but the reality is they have been failing a lot of their constituents. Um, so if we're talking to this liberal mindset, these progressives who feel like they're helping, what would you say are the main pitfalls that these people fall into?
One of the pitfalls that I think is the savior is it thing. I think that's the major red flag. The second thing I would say, from my observation, because I sat in where there was this woman at the time. I don't want to say her name yet because she might be running for president, but she was making it sound like she was running across the city, and then we need prayer, we need all of this, and I think the religious aspect of it is such it dismisses the nuances, because though she may be religious and thinking that she's helping, but she's alienating the LGBTQI community, and that ain't helping anybody. And then how's on how? So the second thing is that there is again this narrative that charity versus mutual aid. We need to understand charity, for example, is what I grew up, and I'm not going to tell you how old I am, but I grew up when people said that people were needed homes or needed food. what did you do? We had canned food drives, and we thought that when we were, and I'm not knocking if people would still do it, but thought we were winning. We thought we were really addressing the issue. But the food drive is basically for house food insecure people that are housed. Unhoused people can't eat or don't want to eat these dry pinto beans, or we get the things that we don't eat in our house, and we just put it in there, and we think we were winning and doing something. With mutual aid is this: unhoused people are people. They want diversity of food. That's one of the biggest things. That's one of the things that I'm very proud of now is seeing the mutual aid groups doing that. It doesn't always have to be 5 star. I want to say most people like 5 star food, but it's that's good. But it doesn't have to be pork and beans and hot dogs. It doesn't have to be like there was a week that we had like I kept emphasizing because I knew unhoused people were like they're grateful, but they get tired of chicken salad sandwiches for 5 Saturdays in a row. I mean, there are people that like it. That's fine. And there are people that are gripped into the meritocracy or the great food narrative. But there was something like, man, can we get something else besides? I won't want to be rude because I don't want to eat cold chicken sandwiches every five. I like diversity. I like and that's the thing. I was trying to say, let's do food diversity. One event we can do barbecue. That's the prize. I'm talking about good barbecue. I'm not talking about bad. Or we can do fried chicken. We talking about spaghetti. We talking about a guy that came out and made fresh pizza, not from the store. He made the dough. He made the thing. It's a success. It was like it showed that we see unhoused people as human beings that have varying tastes. There was a resident, another unhoused resident, Mama Cat. She made a huge pot of gumbo. I mean, it's like showing that. Of course, we had some of the other communities showed food of their own. The Japanese had, I'm going to butcher this, the fried chicken with the rice ball. It was like the point of it is like when unhoused people come to our power ups, they know that they're going to get quality food. They know that they're not going to get something that is not the same thing every Saturday. We may do pizza, we may do gumbo, we may do what was it? Not tabbouleh, Middle Eastern food. We may do barbecue because I push for Black History Month and Juneteenth that we have a day or a day out of the Saturday to do a barbecue. Doing a Black cultural food that shows our culture, because a lot of times in many spaces it forgets. And like I'm in a little Tokyo, and I always remind them like, okay, every culture has their food. No one's trying to look down on anybody's food, but there is an anti-Black sentiment and the anti-Black unconsciousness that they don't want to talk about Black food, or they think Black food is unhealthy, or that conversation. I love that you speak about that on your page and talk about it. And that is sometimes it's also in our activism spaces that we have to grapple with that. There's nothing wrong with Black people's food. There's nothing wrong with Italian. There's nothing wrong with Filipinos food. That food is sustained us. Whether we have used our ingenuity, all of our cultures have used our ingenuity, our culture, our love to sustain us, and there's nothing wrong with it. I can imagine if we do 5 months of having spaghetti, okay, I get it. But when we bring up our culture food, it should not be met with a side-eye disdain. And no matter how maybe some of the people in our culture might not want, but the point of it is, it should not be looked on or thrown aside, which is what I'm not saying are doing this, but I think in our cultures, we really have to tamp down on that bias.
I'm so glad that you said that, because I think like it just made me think about how I feel like one of the animating similarities that you see, whether you're talking about um, Democrats or Republicans who are anti-unhoused people, is this idea that whatever I'm doing for you, beggars can't be choosers. It doesn't really
Yeah,
matter. You like this, you like that, you have dietary restrictions, you've been eating this thing for 6 months. I don't really
yeah,
care. Um, I have a half-eaten sandwich. You need to be grateful for this thing.
yeah,
And I think that you made such a great point that just because somebody is unhoused doesn't mean that they've lost their love for their culture's food, or they
Yeah.
love it's not like they've forgotten the succulence of ribs and some good barbecue. And
Exactly.
I think it's like it just goes into the fact that the charity mindset is the mindset of just, here is what I have for you, take it, as opposed to
Mhm.
mutual aid, which is, what do you need and what
Yeah.
do you want? And I actually want to hone in on this one as sort of our last question, contrasting those two, because you're right. It's like I mean, especially me being a 90s kid, I remember seeing all the commercials of like, whether it's like, here's the crying Filipino and you can donate a couple cents to save this child, not
Yeah.
talking about imperialism and
Exactly.
colonization, but
Exactly.
hey, here's 25 cents, all the way to like all these PSAs and campaigns about, how we can help, these donation drives. And contrasting that with mutual aid. um, what are other sort of main differences between, like, when it comes to unhoused people and how they feel being assisted by charities? Because we always see like this conversation of like, you donate X amount of dollars, thousands of dollars to the charity. We don't always get to see where that work is, taking effect, or whether or not how much of that money is actually going to unhoused people. And then can you talk about the difference between when you actually work with a mutual aid?
Well, charity, like for example, I've lived into shelters and things like that. I'll give you a much more vivid example. Charity is that people donate food that you don't want to be able to eat, or it's the stale food, or it's the day before it's going to get spoiled, or it's food that is like if you had EBT, you ain't eating that either way. The second thing is that it's that beggars can't be choosers narrative that overcrowds it. I grew up in a time before they had the videos of that. I grew up in the time of the canned good drive. I grew up in the time, and I'm definitely dating myself. There was the African kids, Sally Struthers. I'm definitely dating my, yeah. They used to, Sally Struthers was like this big proponent of talking about these starving kids in Africa. They would have vivid pictures with the flies blowing, and it was a big thing back in the 70s and 80s. So I grew up in that, and people would, be so turned off, like they would turn it off during dinner time, things like that, to get money for those starving kids. And it was detached. It was not. It was impersonal, and it was a way to assuage people's guilt that they gave this money, and they can really block it out. And our society has a way of blocking out colonialism, imperialism, white supremacy, and capitalism. We have a way, and because if we drink it all in at one sitting, we could be so overwhelmed, or we may have to, we'll be ill from all of the residual effects of what we ingested. So mutual aid is a connective tissue of a different thing. It is revolutionary. It is because mutually you're in personally interpersonally connecting with the resident. There are, for example, there is an unhoused resident that has a skill in music, and he blesses us with his musical talents, plays his guitar, tells his story, goes jokes, and he shows up and does acts in the community because he is a valuable member. There's another an unhoused person that does drums, that he did a performance there, and he's doing well. He was on what was one of the soap operas? I forgot it. Was it Guiding Light or General Hospital? One of the two. Yeah, because of his talent. There's other unhoused people, like there's another activist, her reclaimer. Her two daughters have a radio show, and a sister show. So it's creating a mutually assured goals that we are definitely there to uphold the system, dismantle the system, but also looking at each other as equals, or as a person that has a skill, a connective tissue, if you will, or a connective neuron that we connect this big organism that is called mutual aid. Conversely, with a charity, you drop off some discarded food, or you may throw some clothes out and you drive off and you think you've done your good deal for the day. But instead of getting to know the residents, seeing what they need, what they can offer for you, or what, things of that nature, because The unhoused go from I've met doctors, nurses. I met the oldest person I've met out here on the street is 90 years old. I mean, there is such a cross swath of community unhoused of people that you just listening to them, that's an education in the conversation on mutual aid.
Great. I'm so glad that you know, were here to have this conversation. Honestly, our chat went by really, really quickly. It's been an
Yes.
honor to finally again sit down and just like learn from you. Um, and so after all these years, I want to again thank you. I want to also extend the invitation. You're always welcome back on the show.
Oh,
Um,
thank you.
but in
And
the
I would have to
meantime,
invite you to my show.
I
That's
would love to. I would appreciate that.
wonderful, wonderful.
And so
That's
for
cool.
the folks who are listening, um, if you want to go ahead and follow and support you, where can the community do that?
Well, I have a podcast called Weedy and House. That's you can basically follow me on the podcast platforms. But if you also want to support financially, give what you can. I have a Weedy and House Patreon, and it's Weedy and House Patreon. I also have a Venmo, but that's my name, -2 Venmo, um, as well as, like I said, if you're in Los Angeles, please come down to Little Tokyo on Saturdays, and you get to see what we do with what our money goes to: tarps for the cold weather, clothes and gloves, and you get to see, and then get to meet the entertainment. We have a meditation circle, we have a drum circle, we have a piece. There's a lot of things we do here. So I really encourage people to stop by and to learn more about what We and House stands and decide with, or actually advocates for.
Well, I'll be sure that I add all the links so everybody can go ahead and donate, support, follow you. Again, Theo, I really appreciate the wisdom, your time, and I hope everybody has a good night. Okay, everybody, bye.